Okay. I think I got it. There we go. Welcome, friends. How's good to have you here. Hello, everybody. And we are underway. Almost here, ready for a new college football season. Nice to have you here. This is the Sandwich Corner, our companion program to the Sandwich Show, which is normally on Twitch. Then the Corner, you can find us on YouTube and all podcast platforms. My name is Dave Medina. You know me as Davey's Eating a Sandwich on many of the social media platforms out there and on Twitch as well. And of course here on YouTube. We are continuing a series we've started for many years, and it's been a fun journey. We've been doing these previews, if you can believe it, for about 10 years. And we've had our friend tonight and other people over the years preview all these teams with us. It's a new era of college football. We have really much larger conferences. We have new TV contracts, and we have an era of college football without Nick Saban. It's kind of a wild time in college football. And we'll break it all down for you. We're gonna do this preview in two parts. Part one tonight is going to cover the Power 5 conferences, and part two tomorrow. I'm sorry, not tomorrow. Part two in about a week from now is going to cover the Group of 5 conferences. So to do all of this, we need someone with a good amount of expertise, someone who knows all the teams, someone who's followed the sport as intently as he does. We're going to say hello to our good friend, John in Connecticut. John, I am thrilled to have you back. Welcome back to the program. How's it going tonight?
What's going on, Dave? Yeah, very exciting college football season ahead of us. You referenced all the changes, and I've been doing my research, listening to the other podcasts, got the Phil Steele magazine. Like, I'm ready to go here. We have kickoff exactly 10 days away in week 0. So, we're here. We finally made it through the off season, and this should be one of the most interesting college football seasons that we've ever seen.
There's no question about it, John. There's no question about it. I mean, we have new faces and new places. We talked about at the end of the last season, we talked about the end of the Pac-12 and what it means. And now what we're going to see is the fragments of the Pac-12 in new places. Some of those teams will be in the Big Ten. Some of those teams will be in the Big 12. And still others, as we've never hesitated to joke about, have ended up in the ACC, because nothing says West Coast more than the ACC.
Well, you can call it the All Coast Conference now because it's on both coasts.
It's true. That's true. That's a good idea. Maybe they did do that. I don't even know. Maybe that is the name of it now. But either way, it is actually interesting to see what the dynamics of that are in each of these conferences. And what I've kind of noticed the most is that the SEC is suddenly even deeper than they've always been. It's gonna be a really tough conference for anybody this year. So we're gonna get into that a little bit, but first we'll get into our season storylines, and we'll cover the 4 power conferences. I think even realistically we would call it 3.5 these days, because the ACC is just not it right now. But regardless,
you could say the same thing about the Big Ten, honestly. I mean, we've got about 4 teams that are worth anything there. So
that's fair.
We'll get to it.
That's very fair. That's very, very, yeah. We will definitely get to it tonight. So yeah, storylines. I mean, there are some really intriguing. There is definitely a lot of storylines going into the season, but the biggest thing we were talking about is, as we just mentioned, these new conferences. The SEC is bigger and better than ever. In a lot of ways, it kind of is the sport right now, because I feel like for the foreseeable future, the odds of the SEC winning a championship are really good every single year. And honestly, the only one that can consistently challenge that would be the Big Ten. And as you said, like, out of the Big Ten, you're probably only looking at 3 teams, maybe 4 teams each year. So it's a new world, John. And I think I'll give that to you first. I mean, the expansion yields a lot of interesting new rivalries. It destroys a lot of old rivalries, which I'm a little annoyed about. But I will say that when I was doing my research for the spot, they noted that some of the SEC rivalries, some of the rivalries that used to be in the Southwest Conference and the Big 12 got restored. So, for example, you know how Missouri and who was the other team? Like Missouri and Texas A&M, that rivalry's back. And
Texas A&M too.
Yeah. That's a big one. So
Texas and Arkansas, they were in the same conference for a while.
Yeah. So those are some good examples, John. Like So you do get some of these rivalries back, which is good, which is nice. And then obviously the biggest ones you still have. You still have the Iron Bowl, you still have the Egg Bowl. So it's definitely still there's a lot of juice in this conference, and I think we're gonna see how much juice there is as we go through these. But yeah, let's just talk about the whole entirety of conference expansion. I mean, a whole new world. Obviously, the regionality of conferences is no more, but I'll gladly give it to you to break it all down.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about it on our shows towards the end of last year, how the Pac-12 was just destroyed, and really because of their own fault. There was a deal on the table apparently from ESPN to secure the media rights for another 5 to 10 years. I don't know the exact length of the contract, and they passed on it, and then it went to the Big 12, who locked up their position as one of the major conferences. So the Pac and then the Pac-12 went to Apple, begging for scraps essentially at that point, and then it just all fell apart. I think eventually, in due time, Oregon and Washington probably would have made the move to the Big Ten, but it might have taken like another 5 to 10 years. It wouldn't have happened so quick. And then once they left, the other schools, the corner schools like Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, Colorado, they really didn't have a choice just to stick with this just sinking ship of a conference, and they did what was in their best interest and hit the Big 12. Cal and Stanford still make no sense going to the ACC. I think there was just a lot of political pressure from those the figureheads at those schools, and just I don't know. I think that's kind of what ended up happening, getting those schools, and like their academics, I think played a part in how can these schools kind of be left out of power football or power sports. So yeah, it definitely creates an interesting dynamic. Those two schools do not fit whatsoever. So like you're going to get games like Wake Forest at Cal and Stanford at Syracuse, and you know Miami at Stanford. It's ridiculous. Like those they should have stayed back with the Pac-2 and made it at least a Pac-4. Like it could have been. I mean, it's not a conference, but at least it would have been. I don't know. It would not have been as bad as them. With these ridiculous matchups in the ACC. I will say they might be more competitive in the ACC than they were in the Pac-12 last year, because the Pac-12 was really tough and the ACC is much weaker. So I will say that, and they're looking out for their own survival. So I understand why they ended up accepting the invite, but that's just it just makes no it just on a surface level. It's like, oh my God, it's Cal and Stanford is in the ACC. That's ridiculous. Um, it'll be interesting to see like the travel,
Yeah.
how that's going to affect like West Coast schools going east, East Coast schools going west. I think it's when I got cut off on our last golf show, we were talking about Rutgers at USC. It's like a Friday night game at 11 o'clock. Like that's the kind of new things that you're getting with realignment. It like opened up TV windows for the Big Ten, like Big Ten Network. It's not going to be Big Ten after dark with those four West Coast schools, and you could still have like Big 12 after dark too with the Arizona schools in Colorado. Um, it was all really driven by just like media contracts and really greed. And you got to kind of ask yourself, like, when is the bubble going to burst on this? Like, when is enough enough? Like, how much longer will, as an example, Ohio State and Michigan continue to want to subsidize Northwestern and Rutgers to be in the conference? Like, when are they going to be like, okay, well, give us all the money, and like even more consolidation forms, and like there'll be like a super league of 20 teams, or 24 schools, and then like there's kind of like a relegation promotion kind of thing between the divisions. I could see that happening. But at the same time, it's like you kind of need those lower schools to pad your record. Otherwise, every big time school is going to have like 3 or 4 losses if they're all playing each other. So that's kind of another element to it, like for way down the line. But yeah, it creates very, very interesting travel situations, as I mentioned. To create some interesting matchups, like the high profile ones, like you talked about. In the Big Ten examples, like USC is playing Penn State and Michigan is playing Washington. It's like the national championship rematch. And then you have the ones that like you wouldn't watch in your backyard. But I guess that kind of comes with the territory. The other interesting thing in all these conferences is there's no divisions anymore. So you're going to have like 18 team standings. And because you can't play every team in the conference, the schedules are so unbalanced. It's just a complete luck of the draw who you end up playing. So we'll get to it with some of these teams. You play like the top 6 teams in the league, and then another team only plays one of those teams. So it's going to be very, very interesting, these conference championship games. And certainly now with the 12-team playoff, it's like, okay, a team that went 11-1, but against a very weak schedule might not be considered compared to a team that say went 9-3 versus a really tough schedule. So it's going to be fascinating to see this all play out, and especially with the tiebreakers too, with these unbalanced schedules. If there's 5 teams at 9-3, like how are you going to break that tie? It's going to be crazy. So there, my prediction is they're going to be expanding this playoff soon enough once they find out what happens after this year.
Yeah. I wondered, if you think about the idea of them not having not having divisions in any of the conferences, and this is true. I looked through the previews that I saw in my magazine, and I'm like, it's kind of nuts actually, because that might hurt some teams, it might help some teams, but
right, because like some teams, for example, I'll just use Rutgers as an example. They were stuck in the Big Ten East for years
yeah,
with Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. Well, now those 3 teams are off the schedule. Like they can actually have a decent season because their talent is, comparable to the middle to lower end of the Big Ten. And if they only play like one of those teams, I mean, they're in line for a pretty good year. So again, it's just like a big schedule lottery with how these conferences are made up.
would there be enough time to schedule an extra round of conference playoffs? So, like, in other words, like a conference playoff,
Right.
and
I
then a
think at this
conference
point,
champion.
well, for this year, that's not going to happen. But Dave,
Right.
I agree with you. I think that's where this is going to end up
Yeah.
in the future, because how can you like you might see it happen this year with some of these unbalanced schedules. You could get a team that's just played the weakest schedule ever and ends up in like the championship game and could be playing for that automatic bid. But it's going to be crazy because like, what if you're ranked number 4 in the rankings, but you really can't make the championship game for your conference? Okay, whatever. Who cares? You'll just lose your last game. You're still going to be in the playoff. It just opens up so many things. And if we want to talk about the playoff for a second, so how it works if your listeners have not been, following the news. So there's automatic bids for the 4 power conference champions. So that means the winner of the conference championship game, regardless of who it is, gets an automatic bid to the playoff, and they will get a bye week. So the 4 highest conference champions will get a bye week into the quarterfinals, which is bowl games. So it's going to be the same New Year's Six. They're just going to rotate between which bowls host the quarterfinals and semifinals. So those are 6 bowls. So if you weren't a ranked if you weren't one of the conference champions that goes to one of the bowl games, you get to host a first round game on your campus. Now, I don't know about you, but I think some of these schools that end up winning their conference, like, yeah, that's great, you get a bye, but just for the pure, you know, uh, revenue and heightened sense of just the atmosphere on campus and all that would do for the school community, I think they're going to want to host a game and not just go directly to the bowl game. So my prediction is that after this year, once they see like the impact that this is going to have on those schools that host the first round game, they're going to expand this to 16 teams. So then there'll be no bye. So they'll still do the bowl games for the quarterfinals and the semis, but the top 8 seeds will end up hosting first round games because like Texas or Ohio State is going to see this and they're going to be like, oh my god, we want one of those too. Like why can't we host a first round game? So I think this will expand pretty quickly after that, plus just the tiebreaker situations. And they're gonna move on this quickly. But in addition, so like I mentioned, the 4 teams get the bye, the 4 conference champions. So if like you end up having like a 9-3 team somehow win the conference out of the blue, well, they're going to get a bye, and a 10-2 team is going to host the first round game. Um, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very, very tricky to see how this all shakes out. But and after the buys are determined, it goes to a committee like it has been for the last how many years. And of course, Dave, they have so much integrity. This committee, they're not going to make any faulty decisions and
Who would
use
ever think
the
that?
best logic possible to get the best teams in there. Of course, they're going to do that.
It'll make complete, yeah, exactly. It'll be completely well organized and not biased at all. No recency bias either. Oh Lord, yeah.
So you'll have the 4 conference champions, the best group of 5 champions. So that's why all these group of 5 games are going to matter so much this year. Down the stretch, like you'll be watching games from like in the past. Who cares if 2 Mountain West teams are playing on a Friday night? Like, okay, degenerate gamblers, like, yeah, we're watching and we're gambling, but it could have a huge impact on the national championship because one of those teams could be in line to maybe win the conference championship and make the college football playoffs. So, it's going to be just for that part of the room. The games might not mean as much to the top of the college football, like Ohio State and Texas and Michigan and schools like that, because they're going to be in. But for the mid-level kind of teams and then the group of 5, like every week just became more and more meaningful, especially towards the end of the season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, and we've seen teams like TCU get snubbed and they would get all angry about it. And, in some cases there was good reason for it. Cincinnati had that for a while, but then they made it one year. These are the kind of teams that are going to find the most value in these kind of scenarios. And even within the power conferences, you're going to see some potential bubble teams, which is good. I think that's good that we have that in place. I don't necessarily know if it's going to change who wins the title every year, but at least people have the opportunity, which is the biggest thing. I think.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, more teams, you cast a wider net. I mean, especially with the big conferences and the unbalanced schedules. I mean, we'll go through it. Some of these schools, they're really only playing maybe 1 or 2 like games that they could lose, especially the top teams. So it's definitely a much better system than what we had before.
Oh, there's no question.
And this year, Florida State would be in 12-0, and they'd make it this year. They would not be out. So
and that's a good thing. I mean, I would hope that if this were to happen again, that their quarterback doesn't get hurt. I mean, that sucked, but you know what I mean? But the general idea is wonderful, and I agree. It's nice that that's behind us. Ironically, I think Ron made the point a while ago, that we had a fairer system when we had 2 teams than we had when we had 4. Ironically enough,
that's absolutely true, because once you start drawing, and it just never made sense because you had 4 teams and 5 conferences or 6 conferences. The math didn't add up.
Yeah.
It just didn't. It honestly, it was better off when it was 2. And now the griping. I know we just joked about it. The committee's going to be full of shit again, but at least they're going to be full of shit with the 12th team and not the 3rd team. If you lost 3 games or 4 games, okay, you really don't have that big of an argument.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's kind of like when you're arguing about bubble teams for the basketball tournament. It's the 35th versus the 36th at large team. It's okay, you can't complain that much that you're not in.
Some fans still will, but you're absolutely right.
Oh yeah, they sure will. Sure will, but it won't be like Florida State last year.
For sure. Well, that's great. I mean, the 12-team playoff was one of the storylines too, so we covered that pretty well. We can save the Nick Saban stuff for when we get to the SEC preview, but it's definitely going to be different. I mean, Nick was always the top dog for a long time, and him retiring at the end of last season is an enormous story. I mean, Nick Saban was a huge part of college football, and without that top dog, well, it's an interesting scenario because I think even before he retired, Georgia was clearly the best program in college football. So I think that moment had already happened. But just the figure of Nick Saban being in the sport we're gonna miss that for sure. I don't know if the sport's going to be better this way or worse this way or about the same. I don't know. I think whatever impact it could have had has already happened, you know? But it's definitely going to be a different world for Bama. I don't know. John, do you want to just comment on Saban specifically, or we can save it for SEC preview?
Yeah, it's certainly gonna be different. Without him on the sidelines at Alabama, I mean, he's always good for at least a memorable quote or like when he's having a sideline interview, and uh, just his coaching prowess, it will certainly be missed. I mean, Bama was just stacked with talent every year, and they were going to be in contention. Not to say that they won't be anymore, because I think Kalen DeBoer was a great hire for them, long term, and this year too. But yeah, it certainly will be a little bit different without Saban. And I could be wrong, but he's going to be doing like some broadcasting. Is he going to be on game day? I thought maybe not every week, but I thought I saw he's going to be doing some work on ESPN.
Yeah, I believe that's right. I think I did hear he signed with ESPN for something, for some way, shape, or form, which, that's, yeah.
Yeah, who would have thought? We got Belichick and Saban now, like in the media.
You won't believe this. I mean, maybe you will believe this, but I actually think Belichick can be awesome. He's a really fun guy to listen to.
I just think he kind of held it in on held back on his press conferences with the Patriots because he didn't want to give anything away to the opponent, and he just kind of came off as a rude jerk when really he could probably just talk football for hours. So that actually might help him get. I think he wants to coach again. It'll probably maybe help him get a job for next year in the NFL. But that's a different story. But yeah, interesting that those two are going to be like in the media this year.
Oh yeah. I can't wait to hear their thoughts on these press conferences.
Oh yeah.
That'd be fun. So another great segue. I didn't mean to do this, but these segues are phenomenal. Like we're talking about these two on TV. We should address the new broadcast deals. It's a new era of broadcasting as well. We no longer have the SEC on CBS. That will move to the ESPN family of networks. And the Pac-12 is no longer, so you're now going to see a shit ton of Big Ten on CBS and NBC this year. But it's an improved Big Ten because now it includes 4 of the core members of the original Pac-12. So I don't know what to say to that. I mean, I'm going to really miss hearing, Gary Danielson and Brad Nessler do the biggest game of the week in the SEC. I mean, to hear whoever the hell is going to do those games and Booger McFarland, like I don't know.
Oh my God! Please don't mention his name. I think he's in the studio.
Yeah.
Now. I mean, I still can't get enough of him. When they cut in at halftime, I have to change the channel, or thank God he might be on mute. But yeah, Nessler and Danielson will be doing the Big Ten. I don't even know if CBS gets the number one choice or if it's NBC. I don't know how that works. Like who gets the number one game? I did see that they're calling Ohio State versus Akron the first week, which has a point spread of -50 for Ohio State. So that's the kind of game that they're going to be getting. Like obviously Big Ten spreads won't be that high, but yeah, that's the kind of game the Big Ten is offering us the first week. The ESPN certainly went all in with the SEC. It's going to be SEC at noon, SEC at 3:30, and SEC at night. And I don't know who the broadcast team is for the SEC 3:30 game at the game of the week, where that used to be on CBS. I don't even know if ESPN announced their broadcast teams yet. My guess would be it would be Fowler and Herb Street, because I don't think they'd be doing like primetime ACC now. I think they'd be doing SEC. Would be my guess. Wouldn't you think that?
Yeah, I would think so too. Yeah, I mean, the biggest game is always the SEC game. Frequently, of the two, I mean, it's a no-brainer. So I'm pretty sure they're gonna put them there as well.
So that'll be good if they stay with that game. And then, like I said before, the Big Ten Network just got a whole lot of more programming to fill. So they're going to have the night games with USC and Washington and Oregon and UCLA. So the BTN just got like a 10 or 11 o'clock window. And now because there's so many teams, Fox has Friday Night Football now. Every Friday from week 1 to the end of the year, there will be football on Fox on Friday nights, whether it be most of them are Big Ten. There's a couple Big 12 matchups, but you're going to get a Power Five game every Friday night. And it's because there's so many teams. It's like, okay, like we got to play some of these games on Friday and like expose it to the national audience. So I guess that's kind of a good um, side effect of this realignment is that we get some more weekday football. And just games get buried on Saturdays. So like if there's
Yeah.
only 3 or 4 of them on a Friday night, it's much more preferable to watch those
Yeah.
than like on a Saturday where you're trying to follow like 50 games.
Yeah, it's sneaky good. Sneaky good. And actually would benefit the former Pac 12 teams the most. I think the West Coast teams get a really good benefit out of that. I imagine they're going to put a lot of their games on there. As you
Yeah,
mentioned,
most of them that I saw were involved the newer teams. I mean, there were a few. I think I saw like a Purdue, Michigan State, and like Iowa, Maryland, or something. But there was only a couple of them that were from like the previous or the standing team. So it was mostly the newbies that got the Friday night games,
cool.
which is fine.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. I looked at this. This is neither here nor there, but I did see the UCLA home schedule this year. It's almost like their entire schedule is the Rose Bowl every week. Because like you see the old Big Ten team visiting, and they get a game against Minnesota, they get a game against Indiana, they get a game against. Then the game against USC too, but it's funny to see all these former games that could have been Rose Bowls in the past are basically the entire home schedule for the UC.
Well, the good news, Dave, is if you want to go to the game, it'll cost about 100 times less than the ticket for Rose Bowl if you want to go see uh, UCLA versus like Minnesota or UCLA versus Indiana.
100% on the cases of Minnesota and Iowa. Iowa's interesting though. There are a lot of Iowa fans in town. I mean, actually, surprisingly expensive for that game.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Iowa's got a pretty good team, so I wouldn't,
Yeah.
I'd travel too if I were them. Or do they have like a base of fans out in LA?
They do. I think they have a bar. They do
Interesting.
they have a special bar. They designate a bar in the area as their watch party, and it gets well attended. I am told.
Could you imagine like last year, like that they had to take a shot every time they had to punt or every time that for every point that was scored. I mean, last year it would have saved them because they didn't have an offense, but like that
Yeah.
would just be hilarious for some of those drinking games.
Ooh. Yeah. I mean, I could do it for shits and giggles, but that's gonna be a nasty night. That's gonna be a rough night for me. And all of them too, of course, right? So there's just so many layers to this. It's funny to see the new reality of West Coast football these days, in addition to all the other conferences. Like it's gonna be good stuff. So that sets us up. We got their previews to come now, so we'll build our way up. So naturally, that means we'll start with the ACC. I mean, what can you say about the ACC, John? I mean, you do have Florida State and Clemson, your two most your perennially good teams. You've got Miami and Louisville and NC State like kind of a level below. You've got the new teams, including SMU, who had a really good year last year. That's an interesting watch. And then everybody else, the Carolinas, Virginia Tech, and then some of the dregs of of football. Sheesh. So John, there's a lot to unpack. So let me give it to you for the ACC preview.
Yeah, there's a lot of dregs here. I mean, if you're talking about in terms of just teams to make the college football playoff, like again, the conference champion will make the playoff. So you could see a scenario, where there's teams tied at 6-2 in the conference, like 4 teams tied at 6-2, and all based on schedules. You could get like Louisville versus NC State in the conference championship game, and like Florida State and Clemson are locked out. So it really is kind of up for grabs in terms of like the champion, but in terms of like the depth of the league, like I can't see more than like 2 teams out of this making the college football playoff, honestly. I think you have to look at Florida State and Clemson are your two kind of favorites. Clemson, they don't use the transfer portal. I think they only brought in like one transfer from outside the program, but they're always going to be talented. They're going to have a good defense. Cade Klubnik will be returning as their quarterback. Dabo Sweeney, he kind of seemed to lost his edge a little bit last year, but they finished strong. towards the end of the year, kind of like after they were out of it. But um, they're definitely going to be in contention, and they do play Florida State. So one of those two teams is going to be taking a loss, which will kind of open it up for the rest of the conference to kind of slide in there to the championship game. Florida State obviously loses just a ton of production from that team last year. I mean, they had so many players drafted in the NFL, especially on their defensive side of the ball. And then, their leader, Jordan Travis, is no longer there. He, after his brutal injury, but he had run out of eligibility anyway. But they're still going to be really talented. And they bring in the former Clemson quarterback, DJU. He had a detour at Oregon State last year, but now he's coming in. So at least they have an experienced quarterback, and I really think Mike Norvell has done a nice job just building up that program from when he got there. They were kind of bereft of like very high talented players, and he did a really nice job in building them the right way. Inside and out with the lines, and eventually all the skill position players followed after that. And they are certainly one of the favorites to win this conference. I've seen a lot of people talking about Miami and all the transfers that they brought in. I mean, they've used the NIL to their benefit. They brought in a ton of like Power 5, well, Power 4 now, transfers on the defense. They bring in Cam Ward from Washington State. He's a very dynamic quarterback. And they're going to be right in the mix. I mean, they have a pretty soft schedule as well. So again, they kind of win the schedule lottery. But the one thing you have to worry about with Miami is their coach, Cristobal. Like, this guy's a clown. I mean, Dave, do you remember the game last year when they literally could have taken a knee and won, and this moron tries to run a play against Georgia Tech and they fumble and they lose the game. Like, and he's done it before too. He did this at Oregon.
That is insane.
So this could go very well. Like, they are really talented. Like, they could make the win the ACC and make the college football playoff. Or it wouldn't surprise me if they just completely it all went to shit and they collapsed, because that's just the kind of team that this is. So I think they're very much one of the teams that's in contention here at the top. I'll just mention a couple others. A lot of people are high on Virginia Tech just because of they just return a ton of players from last year, but their wins on their schedule really weren't that great. It is a lot of returning players and Brent Pryce in another year in the system that he brought over, but I don't know if I'm going to be sold on the hype of them like winning 6 games against really not great competition, and then they win their bowl game against a Tulane team they just completely Brits and the whole team had left. So I don't know what you can really say with that, but people are high on them. Louisville's always going to be in contention with Jeff Brom. They bring in Tyler Shuck. He's a quarterback who's played at numerous stops like Texas Tech and Oregon. The problem is he's not healthy most of the time. So if he can last the year, I think they're going to have a decent shot at maybe making the conference championship game. But I don't know if I trust him being healthy. And certainly, Brom is a good coach. I mean, he took Louisville to the championship game last year again because of one of their better schedules. And then he took Purdue to the championship game when he was with them at the Big Ten a couple years ago. So he certainly knows how to coach, but I question Shuck being able to stay healthy for the full year. And then the last two teams I want to mention that I think could possibly make the championship are NC State. They bring in Grayson McCall. We know him from being at Coastal Carolina all those years, and that was a great get on their part. So NC State is going to be really talented. They always have a great defensive line. They do a great job on that side of the ball. So we'll see if they can finally kind of break that ceiling. They just seem to be stuck at 8 wins every year. But they certainly have the talent, and their schedule's not too bad either. And then SMU, they raised like millions and millions of dollars once they got the ACC invite. So they're taking football seriously. especially like with their NIL collectives and everything else. The only thing I want to worry about SMU is just the jump up in schedule,
Right, right.
because last year they played in the AAC, which is quite frankly a joke. Once Cincy and Houston and UCF left the conference, it was a complete joke of a conference. So you're playing 10 of those schools. Now you're moving up when you're playing 10 Power Five schools. So just that jump up in competition. We saw it with those other schools when they moved to the Big
Yeah,
12 last year. It didn't really
absolutely.
go that well for them. I think UCF had the best year at maybe like 7 wins. So while SMU was really talented, I think they'll do okay against this schedule. But I don't know if I can expect them to beat 10 wins again. Because every Power Five team they played last year, they lost to. So I think it might be an adjustment for them. But I think legitimately those are the seven, I think, teams that would have a chance to at least make the ACC championship game. The rest are just kind of just dregs. We talked about Cal and Stanford. I think they actually might be more competitive in the ACC than in the Pac-12, especially with schools making like the trips from the east to the west. I think they're going to have some good home field advantages. I will say that, and Cal does have a talented some talented players on their team. Like Jaden Ott is one of the most electric running backs in the country. But yeah, the rest of the teams just there's really not much. So yeah, those are kind of my initial thoughts on the ACC, and we can dive into any other team that you want a little more closely. But those are kind of the teams that I think we should identify as like the contenders to like make the championship game.
Now you hit this all squarely on the nose. I my thoughts on SMU are very similar to yours. I do think it's a team that could be very talented, but you're spot on when you said. But then when they played anybody in the Power Five, it was not good. It was not pretty for them, and and you literally the comparison is perfect to compare them to other people from the former AAC like Cincinnati and so I'm pretty much echoing everything you just said. Like, I feel like the step up in competition could be problematic for them. Now, listen, sometimes it works out. Like, if you talk about teams that were formerly FCS teams and they made it into the Sun Belt, that sometimes works out really well for certain programs. But this is definitely a huge step up. Even the ACC is a huge step up for SMU. So it'll be interesting to see if they can sneak up a couple wins here. Like, for example, could they beat Pitt? Absolutely, they could beat Pitt.
Oh yeah, I'm just looking at their schedule right now. Like, to start off 4-0 because they're playing. This is all non-conference though. They're playing at
Mhm.
Nevada, Houston Christian, BYU, and TCU. Those are all wins. And then they get Florida State at home. Like if they want to prove that they're a player in the ACC, if they win that game, I mean they're gonna be right there. But then they have three straight road games, like at Louisville, at Stanford, at Duke. Like that's three Power Five road games. Like could they win all those? Like yeah. But like I just mentioned, like Louisville could be a loss. They definitely could beat Stanford and Duke. And then they play, for the bottom teams like Pitt, Boston College, Virginia, and Cal. So they have a really good schedule, honestly. Now I'm looking at this. They only play like two of the top teams that I went through before. So they theoretically, like if they are as good as some people are saying, and they definitely have talent. Like I'm not gonna say they don't. They brought in a lot of talented players. It's just that step up in competition, even if it is slightly better than the AAC, they could do it. But the schedule is very favorable. I just went through it. Like there's really nothing much there. They could win like 8 or 9 games now that I'm looking at this.
Yeah, 100% on that. I feel like this kind of a conference is one where the schedule can make or break your season, and I think SMU got a good luck at the draw in that regard. So pretty well said. Thank you for your recap. Thank you for your preview. That's very comprehensive, John. And let me say hello to Eric in the chat. Welcome to our program. If anybody watching us tonight has comments and wants us to offer some thoughts on the season or on their teams or on their conferences or anything else with college football, we'll gladly take those in. So we'll continue our preview now of the power teams, and we're going to segue from the ACC to the Big 12. And in the Big 12, you would not believe that the favorite of the if I were just to ask you straight, like just gun to your head, like who do you think is the favorite in the Big 12?
It's got to be Utah.
You're right. It's Utah. So with no Oklahoma or Texas, suddenly the spotlight turns to Salt Lake City, and for good reason. Utah's a proven winner. They've always been good at winning a solid number of games every year, and they've had their flirtations with winning the Pac-12 and even making the playoff at certain points. So that's the favorite in the conference. But after them, you have some solid teams like Kansas State and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State looked rough in the beginning of last year, but they really turned it around, and they're returning almost everybody. So it's kind of an interesting spot. And I imagine you might find Kansas to be pretty interesting too. Arizona's coming over from the Pac-12 as well. They have some pretty solid talent, provided their quarterback scenario is healthy. And then you've got Deion's Colorado Buffs, not really a favorite by any means, but it could be very entertaining. So, John, let me give it to you for the Big 12 preview.
Yeah, this is going to be the most entertaining conference from top to bottom because while the other conferences are pretty top heavy, um, the Big 12, like I can name 8 teams here that could make the conference championship game. So, Utah, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Arizona, West Virginia, Kansas, or UCF. I think any of those 8 teams could make the conference championship game. So this is going to be crazy from the conference race. And again, this is where all these tiebreakers are going to come into play. Like you could see a 6-3 Big 12 team in conference play anyway make the championship game. And who knows what these tiebreakers are going to be? So all these teams are going to play each other. They're all pretty much going to beat each other. The spreads are going to be so close every single week because there's not much separating these teams. So we want to break a few of them down. Utah is the favorite. You know, clearly a much, I would say, easier conference compared to the Pac-12, but there's a lot of depth, as I just mentioned. Cam Rising is back after he was hurt at the beginning of last year. He didn't even play actually. He torn his ACL, and then there was like reports like he's going to play, and he'll come back next week, and then he just never came back. And he's back for another season. And Utah is clearly, has a great home field advantage. Like Whittingham always seems to have that edge, in the Rocky Mountains there, and they always have a great defense. So good luck on any team in the Big 12 trying to go to Utah to get a win. Like it's just not going to happen. The road games might be tough, but they're the deserved favorites in the conference, I would say. But by no means are they like a lock. Like they're like one of the group to make it there. Kansas State always runs a solid program with Chris Kleiman. They lose their quarterback from last year. It was who was that? That was their quarterback. The name is escaping me at the moment, but Will Howard. Sorry, yes, exactly. Will Howard transferred to Ohio State. We'll get to them in a little bit. So they have Avery Johnson, and it's not Avery Johnson, the former basketball player and coach. This is Avery Johnson. He has long blonde hair, so definitely no relation to that Avery Johnson. But he shows you something in the bowl game last year, the Pop Tarts Bowl. Like he was a freshman quarterback, so true freshman. So we'll see if he can continue that good play. They're always going to have a solid defense, kind of like Utah. And they're going to be well coached. So Kansas State's definitely a team that I like. We'll see if that can translate into a conference championship. Oklahoma State has some of the most returning talent in the conference. Ollie Gordon just came out of nowhere last year and just had a remarkable season with rushing for over 1,000 yards. Alan Bowman returns at quarterback. They get Deshaun Stribling. He was a transfer from Washington State that did not end up playing last year. So he is going to be starting at receiver. They return 10 starters on offense. And so the only thing you worry about with Oklahoma State is they're like a really slow starting team. And you mentioned that, Dave. So they can't afford to do that because they have Utah in the first month. They have Utah and Kansas State in the first month of the schedule. Not to mention they play South Dakota State, who's the FCS champions. Like they would be a legitimate FBS team if they played all FBS. Like if they played in the Mountain West, they might win it. Like that's not a easy game at all. So if they could survive the first part of their schedule, they're going to be very much in contention the rest of the season, just because they are, they return so many players and they're extremely talented, and just seems like Gundy always gets the most out of his team. So they're definitely a contender. Um, I'm not a huge fan of Iowa State just because of the coach. I don't. People love Matt Campbell. I don't know why. They seem to lose close games every single year, and like, oh, it's okay. If it happens one year, then maybe it's just luck, bad luck, and it's going to regress. But he consistently loses close games, and you saw that when Brock Purdy was there, and they had all that talent with him and Brees Hall, and it just last year they went 7-6. Now, granted, they did start to play better towards the end of the year, and they found their quarterback in Rocco Beck, son of former tight end Anthony Beck of the Jets, and he's now an XFL coach. But I can't get behind Matt Campbell when I know I mentioned them as kind of a potential conference contender, but they're kind of like the Miami of the ACC to me. I just can't trust the coaching, even if they do have some pretty good talent on this team. I like their running back Abu Sama. He in the game against Kansas State last year, like I was in the snow, he went for like almost 250 yards and like 3 or 4 touchdowns. So he's definitely got something. But I can't get behind the coach, so I'm probably going to cross off Iowa State off my list. But they're definitely a talented team. Arizona has a big transition because Jed Fish leaves to go to Washington, and in comes Brent Brennan, who was formerly at San Jose State and did a good job there. The good news here is they did keep Noah Fafita, who had a great first season playing quarterback at Arizona, just extremely accurate. Um, so him staying was a big coup. There definitely is some new players on both sides of the ball, but I think there's enough talent here to still be a Big 12 contender. So I don't know. It's just going to be determined on um, how the new they can break in like a new system essentially. But I definitely think there's enough on hand to be a contender. West Virginia is another team that again is going to be one of the more physical teams in the league. They always have a really good running game and defense, and they're kind of like you think of Big 12, you kind of think of like air raid and like high flying like passing teams. Like West Virginia is kind of the opposite of that, and it's kind of like the yang to the yang. Neil Brown was really on the hot seat at the end of last year, and he turned it around big time. And now here they are after a 9-4 season with a decent amount of production returning on offense. Not as much on defense, but I like the talent that they have. So they're and they do have a really good home field advantage, West Virginia. So I think they're definitely a contender. Kansas, love Coach Leipold, working miracles at Kansas with what he's been doing there. From the Charlie Weiss days to Turner Gill, like it was bad at Kansas, and in 3 years he's brought them from 2-10 to 6-7, and then 9-4 last year. And the key to their season, their offense is just going to be electric. It always is. But it's Jalen Daniels staying healthy, and he couldn't do it last year. And luckily, they had a capable backup with Jason Bean. Well, he's not there anymore, so Jalen Daniels has to stay healthy, or else the season is going to get off rails pretty quickly. And the other thing to note about Kansas is they do not, or they're not playing at a home stadium this year because their stadium's getting renovated. So they're playing a few games at a soccer stadium where an MLS team plays, and then they're playing a couple games at Arrowhead. So that's a pretty cool thing for like a college program to be playing some games at Arrowhead. But they definitely, you lose the intimate college home field advantage and atmosphere when that happens. So Kansas, and they definitely have to improve on their defense. That was definitely been a huge problem. Like they've been getting into like shootouts, but if Daniel stays healthy, like they're a contender. But that remains to be seen. He's been banged up the last couple of years. Excuse me. And the last team I'll mention is UCF. So I think they could definitely be contenders in this conference. KJ Jefferson from Arkansas comes in at quarterback, and Gus Malzahn has said like he's the closest thing to Cam Newton that he's had at quarterback since Cam Newton. So, they were brought in some Power 5 transfers on defense. They still have some holdovers from skill players from last year that were extremely productive. And now it's just another year in the system, another year getting used to playing against Big 12 caliber talent. So I definitely think they're going to be right there in the mix as well. And, they host Utah the last game of the season in Orlando, and that could be a game to get themselves into the Big 12 championship game. So very, very competitive conference. Like, this is going to be the conference that you want to watch like week to week, because every game is going to matter. I know I didn't mention like about 6 or 7 teams. It's just such a big conference. I will say, like, Colorado, Shedeur Sanders is going to get all the hype. Deion's going to get all the hype, but I just don't think they're quite ready yet to challenge. Like, they're bringing in like 40 new players every year. It's like a brand new team again, except for Shedeur and Travis Hunter and his other son at quarterback Shiloh. So I don't think it's going to work out for them again this year. Like, you're bringing in a whole new team. So I think that the teams that I mentioned, like, I know it's kind of broad to say like 8 teams have a chance here, but they really do. And it's just all going to depend on, how the schedule works out and like with the tiebreakers again. So very, very competitive conference, and can't wait to watch this one from week to week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if 8 teams are eligible if 8 teams can win it, that's like about half or even almost more than half of the conference. That's really good. That's really deep. Yeah, I think I'm certainly not going to argue your point on Colorado. I'm actually I'm wondering if Deion might even be on I don't know what his contract is, but I think people are they might put him on the hot seat in the middle of the season. Like, his strategery, so to speak, has been terrible. My goodness.
I don't know if he's on the hot seat per se, but like, couldn't you see him just leaving for another job? Like, God forbid, like, he goes to coach the Cowboys or something. Oh my God. Can you imagine?
That would be rough. You can actually do worse than Mike McCarthy. That's actually, that would do it. That would be worse. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I could absolutely see that, John. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if at the end of the year he's just taking the high road hitting the road and leaving somewhere else. It would make sense. It would seem right. We didn't mention Baylor during any of this, and it just shows you how bad things have gone for Dave Aranda. He's definitely on the hot seat. We'll get into more of that next week, but
yes, very much. Yeah. They are not going to be having a good year. I will say that. Like, yeah. I haven't made my like win total bets, but I think I'm going to be going under on them. It's not looking good for them. They brought in DeQuan Finn, who's a good quarterback at Toledo, but it's kind of a step up going from Toledo to from the MAC to the Big 12. So and their defense has just been so bad last year, and that's like Aranda's specialty. And they have a new offensive coordinator. It's just, I'm low on Baylor.
Yeah, and for good reason. No question about it. So thank you for that, for the preview. Really good. We have a question from Mike, who says, "Who's John's Heisman pick?" That's a good question. Like, we don't really do a specific Heisman preview, but of the people John, who would you favor at this moment?
Oh gosh, that is a really good question.
Yeah,
I don't know. I have to think about that. So
okay,
let's go through some of the previews, and we'll come back to it.
Yeah, okay. I like it. Okay, so stay with us, Mike. We'll come up with something for you. We'll come up with it. If not the end of this show, certainly next week we can get into it. But it's a good question. There's no clear cut. There's no obvious choice here. I think you could pick any of like 2 or 3 people. So, we'll get back to it. Meanwhile, we're gonna keep our previews going. We're halfway through this, through the power teams, that is, and next we move into the Big Ten, and it gets bigger every single decade, doesn't it? It's now so big that it spans the coast, and hilariously, they've updated their like flyby commercial. Yeah. I mean, they should just have it just be a satellite over planet Earth now. Like, flyby is just getting ridiculous. Like, they just zoom all over the country in this commercial. So with all that being said, it looks like Ohio State's still going to be the team to beat in the conference. We know Michigan had such a massive year last year. They won the title, and then Jim Harbaugh moved west for greener pastures with the Chargers, and into the Big Ten comes four legacy Pac-12 teams: Oregon, USC, Washington, and UCLA. UCLA is kind of just hang riding USC's coattails. Are they really a legacy team? Not really, but you get the idea. But still, you've got some pretty solid teams. So it's not programs. UCLA not so much, but the other three certainly joining the rest of the Big Ten. And with that, you have some rubble. You have Iowa, which, of course, is Iowa's Iowa. I don't have anything special to say about Iowa. It's just the same thing that you always see with Iowa. So let me give it to you for the Big Ten preview.
Yeah, so this is the conference that it's like the anti Big 12 in that you know there's 18 teams here, but how many of them legitimately can make the college football playoff? I would say maybe 5, 6. Like there's not much. But see, the Big Ten, it because the middle to bottom is kind of weak. Like they're going to get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the rankings. So you might see like 4 teams out of this conference make it. So even if you're like 4th or 5th place, like you could find your way to the college football playoff. So your two big favorites in this conference to win it are going to be Ohio State and Oregon. Ohio State is like going for it this year. They brought in so many transfers from the transfer portal, and they're recruiting. They brought in Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, and he was like one of their most dynamic running back. In addition to already having Travion Henderson already here, already on the roster. As I mentioned before, Will Howard comes in to play quarterback. Now, he is not CJ Stroud, I will say that. So you will not get that kind of production from him. But he could be, he was serviceable at Kansas State. And with all the weapons around him, I mean, he just kind of has to play point guard and just direct the offense. Like you do lose Marvin Harrison to the NFL draft, but Ohio State is wide receiver U. Like they're just going to keep just pumping out guys. And then obviously the kind of black cloud is that they couldn't beat Michigan the last couple of years. And there's questions about Ryan Day's coaching ability. Well, if there's a year to get Michigan, it's this year because Michigan's like completely retooling with Harbaugh gone and just all those players they lost. So yeah, Ohio State is definitely one of the favorites, and they really should make the college football playoff because their schedule too is just like a complete joke. They have 2 games that I think they might lose. They might lose at Oregon. They probably will lose at Oregon, honestly, because that's just a tough trip. And they might lose at Penn State. Other than that, they're going to win like every single game on the schedule. And Michigan too at home. But again, I think they're going to beat Michigan. Michigan is going to be down this year. So you can just pencil Ohio State in. Even if they don't win the Big Ten, like they're going to be in the college football playoffs just because of the talent they have and the schedule they're playing. They're going to be in. So now that brings you to Oregon, who I really like Dan Lanning. I mean, he's just done a tremendous job coming over from Georgia, from that Kirby Smart tree of coaches, and he's proving his worth. I mean, they lost to Washington twice by 3 points last year. Otherwise, they had an undefeated season. And obviously, Bo Nix is in the NFL, but it doesn't matter. They bring in Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma. I don't know. I'm not a huge Gabriel fan, but I think he's definitely going to do just as well as Nix, maybe even better. Nix seemed like, obviously he was a first-round NFL draft pick, so I can't knock the guy too much. But it just seems like he's more of a check down kind of guy. Didn't really go deep too often, but he ran the offense really efficiently. And I assume Gabriel could do the same thing. I mean, they're just loaded with the other players they have. Tez Johnson, just an absolute beast at wide receiver. And then Lanning is just going to oversee the defense, like just tons of starters returning on that side of the ball. And again, they have a pretty easy schedule as well. They only have really 2 games. Again, just like Ohio State, 2 games that are going to could be losable in my opinion. So they're, as I mentioned, they do play Ohio State and then they play at Michigan. But again, I think Michigan is a little down this year. So yeah, Oregon is going to be right there. I think um, they might be your best bet to take to win the conference. But yeah, they're going to make the. I think you could just pencil in Oregon and Ohio State like into the college football playoff right now. Now again, that doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to make the Big Ten championship game because like with these tiebreakers, some of these other schools like if they have one loss in conference, there could be other schools with one loss or even two losses. So because they play each other. So again, one of those teams has to lose in the regular season. And honestly, like I was talking about before, if you know you're going to make it, like it's kind of why would you give yourself an extra game and you're going to get yourself a home game in the playoffs if you don't win your conference? I don't know. It's a very interesting kind of dynamic to see how this is going to play out towards the end of the year. But yeah, definitely Ohio State and Oregon are like your top teams. And then on your next level, you have Michigan and Penn State. We just talked about Michigan. You know, just they lose all that talent plus Harbaugh. I know Sharon Moore did a really nice job when he filled in, but you know, running the program now is kind of a whole different kind of thing. You know, JJ McCarthy, I just did see he's out for the year for the Vikings, so that kind of sucks for them. But you know, he's a number one draft pick, so you can't replace that. I mean, Alex Orji, I see him more as like a kind of like an option running quarterback. I haven't seen too much of him from a passing perspective, so he'll have to improve on that or show some more flashes with that. They're just going to want to run the ball because Moore is he was a running backs coach. So they're just going to take their offensive line with Donovan Edwards and just run at you the entire game. If you can't stop it, then you're not going to beat Michigan. If you have a defensive line, you can handle Michigan. So they should still have a good season. I just don't think after what all they lost, they're going to be a national championship contending team. They could easily win like 8 games 8 or 9 games, but is that going to be good enough for the playoffs? There might be just on the fringes. Penn State, James Franklin, you can't win the big game like it's been talked about over and over again. You can't beat Ohio State and Michigan. Unfortunately for him, Ohio State is still on the schedule, so they do have to play Ohio State, but the rest of the schedule is pretty manageable. I'm not a huge fan of Drew Aller. Like he just again, he's kind of more of a check down kind of guy. Like there wasn't much explosiveness with their offense. Nick Singleton, though, he's a very elusive running back. So I like him a lot. Their defense is going to be really good. It usually is at Penn State. Abdul Carter, one of the better defensive ends in the conference. So, we'll see if again, like the move to this kind of setup helps Penn State because their conference games, instead of playing Ohio State and Michigan every year and whoever else they got out of the West, well now they kind of mix and match some of those teams on their schedule. It's a very very manageable schedule. Like again, at USC and Ohio State are kind of like the two games that like all right, those are very losable, and then maybe at Wisconsin, but I don't know, but Penn State could find their way into the playoff just by looking at the schedule. Like they could be like 9-3, and they're going to get the benefit of the doubt, I think, from the committee. So again, it all comes down to some of these schedules. So yeah, Penn State's going to be right there, and then the last team I kind of want to mention in this group is Iowa. Their defense is going to be really good again. It always is. They just find defensive linemen from the cornfields, and it always works out. They're going to have another cornerback like Cooper DeJean last year went to the NFL. They're going to have another. It's just going to work out. It all comes down to can they score some points. Well, Ferentz got rid of his son, so their new offensive coordinator is Tim Lester, who was the former head coach at Western Michigan. So I think that could be an upgrade. I don't know. The problem last year was they got injured at quarterback and they were down to just practice squad level players. So now Cade McNamara, who was at Michigan previously before JJ McCarthy, like kind of usurped him. He got hurt last year, so he never played. So he's back, and if they can get good production out of him, Iowa. This schedule is very very manageable. So their Big Ten games are at Minnesota, at Ohio State. Okay, that's tough. They're probably going to lose that. But then like Washington, at Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin, at UCLA, like you mentioned, at Maryland, and then Nebraska. Like they could run the table besides that Ohio State
Absolutely.
game. So again, like say they have one loss and like Oregon has one loss, like they don't play each other. Like what's the tiebreaker coming down to? Or say Oregon somehow lost a second game. Like you could see Iowa in the Big Ten championship, or even like with this schedule, like I would not be surprised if Iowa is like the 11th seed in the college football playoffs. Like they could go 10-2 easily with this schedule. Um, so watch out for the Hawkeyes this year.
Yeah.
Honestly, like I can see it for sure, especially if they get a little more offensive production. And then I guess I'll just mention one more team, Dave. We'll mention your Trojans. How are you feeling about USC coming to the Big Ten? Like,
Yeah, it's a tough spot. I mean, they're losing a lot of
I
players.
do like Miller Moss though. Like that was a great performance in
For
the
sure.
bowl game.
For sure.
So
Sure.
yeah, you can't replicate Caleb Williams, but I think he'll be pretty good. I think Lincoln Riley he's doing everything he can to try to figure out this defense. Getting Danton Lynn from UCLA was a huge get. Like just stealing him from their rival. I think that's a great hire. I think they're working towards it. It may not prove to work out this year, but I think USC could be okay long term in the Big Ten.
I think that's a great call. I really think it's probably not going to be a great year for USC, but the thing that's nice for them this year is the weight of expectation will not be very heavy at all. Not at all. Like,
Exactly.
Yeah. So they're going to probably.
I mean, I'm looking at the schedule. How would you feel about like an 8-4 year?
Pretty good. I feel pretty good about that. Yeah. So that's kind of it's kind of where they need to be at the moment because they've had really good expectations in the recent past, especially with Williams there, winning the Heisman, and it's wild how that fell apart. And Williams, I mean, people were saying, Williams got exploded. Now, I don't know the truth to that. Like, is Caleb Williams truly a fraud? I'm not sure if I'd go that far. Like, it's kind of people.
As a Green Bay fan, I hope he is. Honestly, sorry, I don't want to wish ill will against him, but I kind of hope he is a fraud.
Yeah, I mean, with the Bears' luck with quarterbacks, you might have a decent chance at that one. So we'll see. Yeah. So I don't know. I think a tempered expectation, like you said, 8-4 is it's kind of a good bar. I think it's a good bar for this team. They still have talent, even though they lost a bunch of guys. Obviously, they lost their quarterback. I completely agree with Miller Moss. And NC State was not a bad team at all. Like that is a solid, or whoever they played last. I'm sorry, let me go figure out who they played. But
the bowl game.
The bowl game,
they
yeah.
beat up on Louisville.
Sorry, another red team. Yeah. So Louisville's not a terrible team at all. And
no, I mean I'm looking at their schedule. Like it's not. They have some tough games. Like they have to play Penn State and at Michigan will still be. Even though they're down a little bit, it'll still be tough. But I mean, they have a lot of winnable games here.
Yeah.
I think that first game against LSU is going to be really interesting.
Yeah.
You should go to that, Dave, in Vegas. Can you imagine the ticket prices for that?
It's not insane. I looked at it. I'm like,
really?
It's like 160. I'm like, not completely out of bounds. I could probably make it work.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in Vegas like the third week of September,
okay.
And I was seeing like there's no UNLV games. I'm like, shit. Like that's kind of where you get your cheap tickets. So I looked to see if the Raiders are playing. I'm like, Raiders versus Panthers. This is a great matchup. I could get tickets for cheap here. And I check and it's like over $200.
Wow.
Like, yeah, no, I am not paying $200 to see the Raiders play the Panthers. No. If it drops to about like 50 before the game, like I'll consider it.
Okay.
I definitely would much rather see that LSU versus USC match. That's not bad.
It's not bad. I mean, look, I'm going to be real about it. I'll favor LSU in that one for sure. Yeah. But it's not a given, is it? Like, because you've seen Chip Kelly in big spots. Like, I'm sorry, Brian Kelly in big spots. I'm not doing that again. I'm sorry. Brian Kelly. Sorry. All right. Oh my goodness. I think.
No, I agree. Like it's only a 6-point spread. I think last I checked. I mean, it's a very winnable game for USC. I mean, we saw LSU last year. The first game, like Florida State just housed them in like a neutral site game. So we'll see what happens. And LSU has a horrible defense. So I mean, if anybody can kind of expose that, it's Lincoln Riley, and they'll scheme something up. But yeah, I mean, we could talk about some of the rest of these teams here, but it's just, they're not making the playoffs. They're not making the championship game. I mean, some of these teams are going to make bowls, but there's really there's really no point in, we'll mention them week to week, like when we're gambling and such, but there's not much happening here. Do you want to is there any particular team kind of on the bottom that you want to talk about? I will say UCLA, I kind of feel bad for them. Like Chip
Yeah.
Kelly just kind of deserted them, like really after signing day, and just he was tired of all like the NIL and transfer portal and everything else. Like he just wants to coach football. So now you have Deshaun Foster, who had an epic press conference at Big Ten Media Day. He's just like, yeah, if you don't know us, we play on the West Coast, and it's just like, yeah, okay. Think we
I remember that.
think we were aware of that, but it's just I feel bad for him because he's just kind of thrust into a spot. It seems like a job that maybe he didn't really want to take. He's just the running backs coach, and now he gets promoted to head coach like late in the process. Like they almost couldn't get anybody else. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem like that's going to work out well for them. But yeah, is there any team here kind of towards the
The
bottom that you want to
the only
talk
one,
about?
yeah, the one I think I'd love to pick your brain on is Washington. How are they going to pick up the pieces after losing their incredible head coach, after losing their quarterback to the NFL? It's wow.
Yeah, they lose everybody. Like it's a brand new team. Like where do you even start with them? I do like Jed Fish because he did a great job at Arizona, but it's gonna take a little bit of time. Now I do think they'll be able to put up some points just because he's an offensive mind, and they did bring in Will Rogers, who was at Mississippi State for all those years running the air raid. So they're gonna be able to put up some points. So and they'll win some games. Like they could be a bowl team. Like their first four games are Weber State, Eastern Michigan, Washington State, and Northwestern. Like that's four wins right there, honestly. And then they get UCLA later in the year. Like they could be a 6-win team. So they're definitely not going to be, in the national championship game again. And they're starting all over, just losing Penix and all those receivers. But I think they'll have an okay year. It's just like average. I think they could be a 6-6 team. But yeah, I don't think maybe as bad as people might think. I think they'll be, kind of middling, which is it's okay after what they just, all the pieces they lost.
Yeah, no question about it. I just hope that Washington football fans are reasonable with their expectations, because it might seem rough to go from making the college football playoff to that. But how can you not do that when you lose basically your entire infrastructure, like over one off season? So
Yeah, it's a brand new team,
yeah,
so we'll see how it goes. And like I said, they have a pretty easy schedule to start off, so
yep,
maybe they can find something after first month.
yeah. I think well, I'll root for them in that respect. I mean, hopefully they have at least a reason, kind of a solid season. So we'll see how it goes. Thank you for getting into that. I was kind of curious what you thought of them. So that should be it for the Big Ten. I have no interest in talking about Nebraska or Wisconsin or nothing personal. Wisconsin
I
fans.
mean, well, I will say their quarterback that they the highly touted transfer from Georgia, Dominic Raiola, like he's trying to mimic, like he looks like a mini Patrick Mahomes. Like he looks exactly like Patrick Mahomes, like how he's got his hair and just his look. Well, I mean, we'll see if he plays like it, but
yeah,
I mean, Nebraska finally has maybe a quarterback. And then I will mention a couple other new coaches. Indiana brought in Signetti from James Madison, who they just blitzed the FBS as soon as they came in from the FCS to the Sun Belt the last 2 years. So that was a great get by Indiana. And then Michigan State brought in Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. So that was I think two great coaching hires. Like it might not work out this year, obviously because it's you're bringing all kinds of new players and transfers and all that. But I think long term, I think those are two really nice hires for the conference and two like good program builders. Honestly, I think Indiana might even make a bowl this year just because I think Signetti is that good of a coach. Like no one expected anything out of James Madison when they moved up to the FBS, and they nearly won the Sun Belt 2 years in a row. Like, they literally would have been in the Sun Belt championship if they were eligible their first year. They just took stupid NCAA rules. But so yeah, those are two coaching hires that I really do like. And then the one last thing I'll say is like Illinois, like Brett Bielema is not going to last after this season. Like a little hot seat prediction, like he's going to be gone.
Yeah. We will do a formal hot seat segment next week to lead off our next lead off that podcast. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a good one this year. It's a good hot seat segment. Like there's so many great candidates that we can get into. Interestingly, One fella who I do not remember on the hot seat last year, but now after watching the season should have been. This is actually leading to your other point, but but the coach for Indiana last year, Tom Allen, had been there 7 years. You know, when I finally actually saw him on the sideline, I realized what a freaking ooga booga that guy was. He was the worst. I can't believe he lasted 7 seasons. So that
I
big,
think it was just so weird. Like they had one good year. I think it was during the COVID year, which kind
yeah.
of makes a lot of sense. Like I don't know, but yeah, yeah, he was not long for Indiana. So I think that they made a great hire switching him out for Signetti.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because like we're talking about Indiana and Iowa, and they're both going to be playing at the Rose Bowl this year. I'm like, man, maybe I will sneak into one of these, like either of those games. Like it could be
Those
surprise.
two would be interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
like but if like Minnesota or like Northwestern, like they'll save your money. But like Indiana and Iowa could be interesting.
no, definitely on Minnesota. I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
PJ Fleck, that boat might be sinking after this year.
We might add him to the hot seat segment.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, yeah. That's gonna be. It's a hell of a hot seat this year. All right, let's get to it. We got we got the big dog. I mean, the conference of conferences this year, the SEC, and this is without Nick Saban, and it's still such a massively dominant conference with some incredible programs. Um, as I said, even when Saban was there the last couple of years, Georgia was clearly the best program in the conference. The recruiting levels are amazing. Like they've been doing such a great job with recruiting. Um, so Georgia's trying to come back after getting their season cut short in the SEC championship game, and with them, you've got some other big favorites, including, well, I mean, then it gets interesting. Like, who would the other favorites be after that? I'm thinking like Texas, LSU, Ole Miss. Would you say like that's kind of where we would lean with the SEC?
Yeah, no, I think that's the kind of the pecking order.
Yeah.
Georgia definitely the favorite. I think they had the one loss versus Alabama, and it kept them out of the playoff, like and rightfully so. It's just kind of funny the bullshit logic of the committee. Like we want to get the four best teams in there. Well, that loss shouldn't have mattered. They should have kept Georgia in because Georgia was clearly one of the quote unquote best teams, but the performance on the field had to matter. So it mattered for them to keep them out, but it didn't matter for Florida State. Like it's just such horseshit. But in any event, Georgia is just going to be loaded again. Uh, Carson Beck, it returns. They bring in Etienne from Florida at running back, one of their best players. They just completely just load up on the defensive and offensive lines. And Georgia's been linebacker U recently, just bringing guys into the NFL. They're just going to be just destroying just basically almost every team on their schedule. So yeah, they're definitely the favorites. After that, the next tier of teams, like it really could go a lot of different ways. Between between like Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, LSU, and then I guess I would kind of stop there. Then there's like another definitive like maybe gap, and then there's like Missouri, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas A&M. I would say those are the 9 teams I would say with the kind of a chance to make the college football playoff. Now again, you could have 4 teams out of this conference, or even 5 teams. I don't know. It depends on what the Big 12 and the ACC does. You could have like 5 SEC, 3 Big 10, group of 5, and then one ACC, one Big 12, and then don't forget Notre Dame. Like we didn't even talk about them. Like they have such an easy schedule. They'll probably make it. I know we can probably talk about them next week. But so the SEC could end up getting 5 teams. So if you're like 9-3 in the SEC and you're like ranked number 10 or 12 in the country, like you're going to be in. So yeah, Georgia's definitely the favorite, and then after that, like I said, that kind of next tier of teams. Alabama's still going to be really good. I mean, I did lose a lot of players just with through the transfer portal and the NFL, but they keep reloading. I mean, DeBoer did a great job bringing in transfers and recruits. They still have Jalen Milroe, and he was just fantastic with his deep ball and just his remember the 4th and 31 play at Auburn. I mean, granted that was a little bit of lucky, outcome there, but still, they're still very talented. And I mentioned how much I like DeBoer as a coach, so they're going to be right there. Like even if it's not like a typical like dominant Alabama year, like they could still go 9-3 on this schedule. They're probably going to lose to Georgia, but their other tough road games like at Tennessee, at LSU, at Oklahoma, like they're all on the road. So if even if they only drop like one or two of those, they could still make it like with 9-3. Like I think they're still going to get like the benefit of the doubt when it comes to just being a program in general. Um, so yeah, I still foresee good things for Alabama this year. Everyone's talking about Ole Miss, and they have the best rated transfer portal class in the country, but it's just I don't know. It's kind of one of those things, like how like you say in the NFL, like you can't win the Super Bowl in the offseason with free agency. I feel like it's the same way with the transfer portal. Like, okay, you can bring in a couple guys to maybe elevate certain positions or like plug certain holes that you have on your team, but you can't bring in like just a mass of players, no matter how talented they are, and expect it to all gel. So I don't know. I kind of get that feeling from Ole Miss. Like they're still going to be really good. Don't get me wrong. Lane Kiffin's like an offensive genius, I guess you could say. Jackson Dart, your old USC buddy, is still here. They did lose Judkins, as I mentioned, to Ohio State, but they still got Bentley is still here at running back. Jordan Watkins, one of the better receivers in the SEC. Um, they just have returning production all over their offense. And like I mentioned, they brought in so many players on defense that have like starting experience that essentially they have like a whole starting lineup of like all stars. But I don't know if it's going to gel that well. And really last year they had a numerous close games. If you look at their schedule, like they were behind in a number of games, like in the third quarter, and they won by like three or between 3 and 7 points in a number of them. So if those coin flips go the other way, like it's not going to be, or even just half, like they're not going to win 10 games again. They win more like 7 or 8. So I'm not quite as sold on Ole Miss as being like this dominant team. Now they could still win 9 or 10 games, but I don't think they're not at like Georgia's level at all. Like when they played Georgia last year, they got crushed. So I don't see them being on that level. Um, I mentioned LSU or Brian or Chip Kelly, whatever you want to call him, Dave. So obviously they lose the Heisman Trophy winner Jaden Daniels now with the Commanders. So it's going to be a different looking offense. Garrett Nussmeier. It's not going to be a kind of read option offense because he's not mobile. It's going to be a more just quick, like a passing offense essentially. So I trust Kelly to put together a nice offense. I mean, they do lose their two stud receivers too. Neighbors and Thomas went to the NFL, but I still think they'll be okay. The real question is going to be on their defense, which was just absolutely horrific last year, and they still won 10 games. So if they get any kind of like defensive improvement, I mean, they're going to be right there. I still feel that first game against USC is going to be telling because if Lincoln Riley and Miller Moss like cook them, they could be in for another rough year defensively. But LSU is still going to be right there. I've seen a lot of people talking about Missouri, and they do have a really easy schedule. I will say that. They only play at Alabama and at Texas A&M, as I would say, like the main SEC contenders. And the rest of the schedule is pretty simple. So again, this is a scenario where you could see like, is Missouri really like the 10th best team in the country? Like I don't know, like but they could make it just because of being in the SEC and being with that kind of record. They return Brady Cook
Mm-hmm.
at quarterback. They bring in Nate Noel, who was uh, a stud running back from Appalachian State, and Marcus Carroll from Georgia State. Like they bring in two great group of five running backs, and then their receiver room is loaded, all returning Luther Burden and Theo Weiss. Like this offense was incredibly explosive last year, and it's even going to be more so this year. Their defense wasn't great, but improving. But again, like I don't know, the schedule is just very easy, and it's going to lead to some questions about at the end of the year, like who do we take, like what do you value? Because like their first 4 games are all at home. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, and Vanderbilt. Like they're going to go 4-0 easily. They play at UMass, which is I don't even know how that game got scheduled, but they're playing at UMass. I should go to that game. Like it's like 40 minutes from me. I should go watch Missouri play and win like 56-0. Um, but you know, even if like I said, even if they lose to Alabama and A&M, like they could win the rest of their games and they could be 10-2 and they're going to make the playoff. And I don't know if Missouri's that great of a team. They did beat Ohio State in that bowl game last year, and I mentioned they have some really talented players, but it's just these unbalanced schedules are just crazy.
Yeah.
And then the last two teams I'll mention, the two Texas teams, Texas and Texas A&M, back in the same conference.
Yeah.
Steve Sarkisian, he's starting to build it up at Texas. I mean, they're bringing in lots of talent. Quinn Ewers, I mean, we were talking about like Heisman favorites. I kind of been thinking about it. Like he could be one of the Heisman favorites.
Yeah.
Quinn Ewers for this year. They barely lost in the college football playoff last year to Washington. They finally win the Big 12. But this is definitely like a step up in competition for sure. But they're still really talented. Like they have like SEC level players, in my opinion. So they could. I don't know if I would consider them like one of the favorites in the conference. Like they're not. I don't think they're at Georgia's level. But we're going to see the game. They play Georgia on October 19th, so that's going to be a great game. And to see how they stack up, I don't think they're going to end up beating Georgia, but they play at Michigan in the non-conference, so that's a tough game. They're one of the few SEC teams that actually play like a hard non-conference game, but they easily can make the college football playoff too with the schedule. So I'm not a huge fan of Sark, but I will say he's done a really nice job since he's gotten here at Texas, just like slowly building up the talent, and this should be probably one of his best teams since he's gotten there. And then I will mention Texas A&M, the antiquated, 100-year-old offense of Jimbo Fisher is gone. Mike Elko is in, and he just remember at Duke, like he took, like no one expected Duke to do anything, and like in 2 years, like he had them as a contender, or competing in the ACC. He had been defensive coordinator here at A&M, so he's familiar with like the atmosphere and what it takes to win at Texas A&M. I'm not going to worry about the defense with him because he's just a great defensive strategist, and they have a lot of players because Fisher, to his credit, recruited really well at Texas A&M. You just couldn't get anything out of it on the field. And Connor Wegman, a sophomore quarterback, he played last year as a freshman and really showed some flashes. So, I like A&M. They do play Notre Dame right off the start of the season, so that'll be a huge test for both teams to see how the season goes. Like a loss there could be like the defining reason why either or gets left out of the playoffs. So that'll be a big game for either team. So so I think those are kind of the teams that are in contention for the college football playoff. I didn't mention Oklahoma or Tennessee. Tennessee, it's always going to be their year, right? Like, that's kind of always their joke. They do have a stud quarterback, Nico, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, his last name, Iamaliva. Sorry, I just probably really just butchered it, but he's a stud. So I will, he's going to be really good. And they're going to have a great offense. The question is their defense with Josh Heupel, and it's that's been a concern of theirs for a number of years, especially like how fast their offense is. But it'll be fun to watch him play quarterback. See, he's going to be really good. I mean, that bowl game against Iowa, we know how good their defense is, and they just destroyed them. And Oklahoma, I'm not a huge fan of Brent Venables. I don't know. They have some talent. But Dylan Gabriel, as we mentioned, leaves. Jackson Arnold's a highly recruited or highly touted prospect. He did play in their bowl game, but I don't know. I think Texas is going to have more success this year than Oklahoma in terms of SEC play. So those are kind of your contenders. The rest of the conference is just meh. Vanderbilt is going to be absolutely horrendous. I mean, it's kind of nothing new. But again, like we kind of talked about it before, like why are all these teams subsidizing Vanderbilt to be in the SEC? Like just like kick them out. Like they should be in the Sun Belt in terms of like the quality of of the teams they put on the field every day. And they might actually win. They have no chance against these teams. It's just it's sad. And then one last thing I'll mention before, if you want to get into anything further, Dave, with the SEC is in terms of hot seat coaches, number one here has to be Billy Napier in Florida. I think I was going to say that.
Yes, I
And
did.
this schedule they have is just it's brutal. Like they probably are improved. Like I will say, Graham Mertz was not as terrible as I thought he was going to be last year. Like he actually played pretty good. But this schedule they have, it's just so they start with Miami at home, then they Texas A&M at home. Okay, again, there's tough teams here. Like at Mississippi State, they can win that. UCF, we talked about that. They're going to be a tough team in the Big 12, and like that's like a little brother kind of game. Like UCF wants to beat, Florida. Like I don't think Florida really cares about playing UCF, but still, like that's a tough non-conference game. And then at Tennessee, just mentioned them. They're going to be good. Kentucky at home, all right, that's kind of a breather. And then these last 5 games, it might be the hardest stretch I've ever seen. So they have a bye, and then they play Georgia, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and at Florida State. Like that's like 5 top 10 teams right there. Like unbelievable. So their non-conference schedule, they play their 3 other like Power 4 teams in Florida: Miami, UCF, and at Florida State, and those ridiculous SEC games. Like they have no chance. This guy has no chance of surviving the year. It's crazy. Like they could have a better team than they did last year. This schedule is just absolutely brutal. So talk about getting the schedule lottery. Like I mentioned Missouri's schedule, and then I mentioned Florida's schedule. Like Florida I won't say they're as good of a team as Missouri, but they could be. But with this schedule, they have no chance. Like if Missouri was playing the schedule, they'd have no chance. But instead, they could make the SEC. They could make the college football playoff. So it just goes to show you like how schedules are going to play such a big role in what happens this year.
Yeah, that's a great call. That's a great call. Yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure if Georgia could go undefeated with that schedule. That's a tough schedule. That back end.
Yeah, absolutely. Like
yeah.
if you look at Georgia's, we'll pull them up again. It's like, okay, like I mentioned, they play at Alabama and they play at Texas. Let's assume that, okay, maybe they'll lose one of those games.
Yeah, I'll pull this up.
The rest of the rest of the schedule, like they're going to sweep. Yeah. So they play Clemson, Tennessee Tech, at Kentucky. All right, we mentioned Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, all right, at Texas, and then Florida, at Ole Miss. That could be, like I said, they almost didn't touch them last year, so that's going to be a win. They play UMass too. Oh my God! Like you invite UMass to the SEC. Like they have 2 SEC games. Like what the hell? Why are they playing UMass on November 23rd? That is such a joke.
That's outrageous.
So yeah. So like again, like give Georgia Florida's schedule. They might.
Yeah.
They're probably. Georgia is either to go undefeated or lose 1 game. But with Florida's, if they had Florida's schedule, they might lose like 2. Like it's just 2 or 3. So yeah, it's.
Let me show that to you again, for everybody on the screen, those of you watching on YouTube, because I think you really need to see the gravity of this. This is absurd.
Are you gonna look up Florida?
Yeah, we're gonna put up Florida's schedule.
Yeah, they might have the rankings on there, so those last 5 games, all those teams might be ranked in the top 10 because the rankings just came out from the AP.
Oh yeah, let me go look at that.
So pull up Florida.
Rankings. And then we're saying Florida's near the bottom of the top.
Oh, they're not ranked, so you just gotta go to the.
Okay.
Got to go to like SEC.
Yeah, okay. Let's go to the SEC then.
From standings, and then just pull up Florida.
Yeah, pull up SEC. Here it is.
Or that way. That way we'll work too.
So okay, so Florida's schedule, right? So if we click on this here, yeah, the only gimme they have is Samford, literally.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Everything else is tough. Like, look at this. Miami. You already rolled out all the teams, but just to look at it, to see it visually, that is not easy. That is not, even Kentucky's not easy. Like that is wow.
I can't see the rankings. So are those last 5 teams all in the top 10?
I mean, who knows if they're going to stay that way? But yes, they are. They're the top. Well, they're in the top 15. So LSU's number 13.
Well,
but so Georgia number 1, Texas number 4, LSU preseason number 13, Ole Miss preseason number 6, and Florida State preseason number 10.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, you literally can't make a harder schedule. Like that is
No,
just
you couldn't.
wow. That is well. I mean, it sucks, but to be fair, but I mean, I don't guess we can't have that much sympathy for Billy Napier here. He had his chances, but that is a rough schedule. You're right. So we'll see. I mean, how many games will it be before they can him? I don't know. I mean, maybe.
Well, no, he'll make it to at least. I think he'll make it to that stretch because before then, I think they can beat Miami that first game.
Yeah.
Honestly, like because we talked about Miami, like they're talented, but in the swamp, at the first game of the year, like Cristobal against Napier, that's quite the coaching battle.
That's what I mean. I gotta
right
see
there,
what.
But
Yeah.
Still, no, I think they have to win. They have to beat Kentucky at home, and then they have to win at Mississippi State. I think they'll win. They'll win Samford. So then between Miami, Texas A&M, and Tennessee, they have to win. I would say one of those games. They have to be like 4-3 by the time they get to that stretch. Those last 5. Because if we're going to assume they're going to lose all 5 of those ranked games. So yeah. I don't think they're going to fire. I don't think they'd fire him to the end of the year unless they like really started off. And if they go like 2-5 in the first 7, like they might fire him by then. But if they have a winning record, they won't. I don't think so anyway. But I guess we'll see.
Because the truth of it is, like, even if what's the point of firing him in the middle of that 5-game stretch at the end anyway? Right. You're going to lose him regardless, you know. So
at that point, they'll probably just wait to the end of the year.
Yeah.
But if they start off like I said, like 2-5, say they only beat Samford and Kentucky or Samford and Mississippi State, and they could be pulling the plug at that point.
Yeah. I was very curious about the odds for that Miami-Florida game. Florida's getting 2.5. I have to take that.
I do too.
Yeah.
I have to.
Yeah. Like,
I will. Home dog.
You're a home dog, right? A home dog, and what has actually been kind of a rivalry, not as big a rivalry as like maybe Miami, Florida State, but still, it's a pretty solid rivalry.
Wow. Yeah, I have to look up the stats. My buddy Phil Steele says they last met in 2019. So I have to look up the history between the schools. But yeah, you have to imagine like there's recruiting battles between the two of them. And you know what? I will give Florida credit for actually playing like their rivals and playing like a hard non-conference schedule. Like that's how college football should be. It shouldn't be playing UMass in their non-conference. Like seriously, how does UMass play? Like put them in the SEC then. If they're going to play 2 SEC teams, let me look at their schedule. Honestly, they might play another SEC team. I feel like they
I'll go look this up. I'll look this up too. Like this.
Look up UMass.
All right. So back to teams.
We went off the rails here, but we got to look it up.
Well, we have to now. I mean, we've talked about UMass at length. Like well, they're independent now, right? Like so they.
Yeah, there's only 3 left. It's UMass, UConn, and Notre Dame.
Okay.
I know they play UConn. That's our rivalry game.
Okay. Wait, they play Notre Dame too? Oh no, they don't.
No,
okay.
God, no.
God, that'd be rough. Like, okay, let's go look. It's not that easy to schedule. You're right. Like yeah.
Oh my God, they play Mississippi State too. They have 3 SEC games. Dude. Are you kidding me?
That's a disaster. Liberty, they're playing Liberty as well. They're Liberty's favorite.
Missouri, Mississippi State, and Georgia. Just invite them to they might as well be Vanderbilt. Just invite them to the SEC.
Would they beat Vanderbilt? I don't know. That's a good. No. Nah, probably not. Probably not.
They would. No, Vanderbilt would beat them.
Yeah, I think Vanderbilt will win that one. But yeah, that's just ridiculous on the SEC. Like, come on, like do better. Like,
well, see, that's how these teams schedule. They schedule to get like bowl eligible, so they'll play for. But see, like Georgia shouldn't be doing that. Like that should be, Vanderbilt's schedule or like Mississippi State's schedule. So okay, like you play 4 cupcakes and then hopefully you win a couple SEC games. But like Georgia should not be playing UMass. Come on.
No, there's no excuse for that. Like Georgia.
What's the point of that game? Like, all right, you're going to pay them $2 million. Great.
And definitely at the end of the year. Come on now. Like, I mean, that's
exactly okay. Like the first weekend, all right, sure, play UMass, but you're going to play them on November 23rd. I'm sure that's for all of boosters want to see.
And this is why like everybody else is killing each other in their rivalry games, and they're
Right.
going. It's just that. This is messed up. Like I have problems with that. I know you do too. I mean, there's no doubt. Like, so anyway, that's it for the SEC preview. That'll do it for Power Schools this year. It was a very comprehensive journey, and I thank you for all the previews. It's really good stuff. Like, we really did cover all the bases. There might be a couple teams we didn't get into. Like, I was thinking Arkansas is one of them, but let's not worry about them. Like, but honestly,
Yeah, Dave, if we really wanted to be comprehensive, we'd have to do a podcast for each conference. And honestly, like I don't have the time for that.
yeah,
So
same here, same here. So with that said,
like, I'll get that elsewhere. Like,
yeah,
I can do my own research but yeah, no, I think what we did was great.
It was
And
great.
to go back to the question, I thought about the Heisman.
Okay.
So I mean, usually you would say it goes to the best player on the best team. But like last year, that didn't happen because Jaden Daniels had such an unbelievable year. But if we're going to go back to that standard, I think you have to say Carson Beck. That would be my pick.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. I think it's a good pick. I mean, the only other one I could see maybe overtaking Carson Beck would be Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers over at Texas.
I can see that too.
Yeah, but they're both good choices. I think you're spot on here. I think it.
Yeah, not to say like because sometimes, like I said, it's almost getting to be like the NFL MVP where it's not necessarily the best player, but it's like the best player on the best, like the best quarterback on the best team kind of thing. Unless it's like an unbelievable outlier, like amazing performance like we had last year with Jaden Daniels. So
yep, that's well said. And so Mike, hopefully you caught that, and I'd like the prediction, John. So that's about it. I think we'll pick it back up next week when we cover the group of 5. We'll have some additional storylines. We'll talk about the hot seat. And then we'll get into playoff predictions, which are going to be much more interesting this year with so many teams. So,
oh man, I'm gonna have to do a deep dive into these schedules then if we're gonna be predicting 12 teams.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. Like you're just thinking like, well, what's the semifinal going to be like? I mean, who knows? Like it's there's so much potential with this playoff format. So
yeah, there really is. And then trying to find the group of 5 team, like could be anybody.
Yeah. So that's coming up next week on the Sandwich Corner. You can catch us at our usual spots. But before we get into that, let's give it to you for final thoughts, John.
This was fun. I think we'll have some more fun with the group of 5 next week. Like we were saying, lots of potential there. I mean, these conferences are so big. Like I wish we could have done more on some of these teams, but it's just you kind of just have to go by schedules and just kind of who's playing who, and there's just so much turnover now with the transfer portal and these new conferences. It's just there's a lot happening, but it's going to be a really, really exciting season. I personally cannot wait, and we're only 10 days away.
Yeah, it's really coming up. It's really coming up. I'm very excited about it as well. And the week 0, there are a couple of good nuggets in the week 0 games, so we should. It's good. I mean, we can talk about that.
Yeah, there's I think there's 4 or 5 games on the schedule for FBS. I know there's some more FCS teams, but we'll have Florida State and Georgia Tech are playing in Ireland, so that'll be kind of like the main game to discuss if we got into week 0 stuff.
Could Georgia Tech pull a Nebraska where they have no wins on American soil? Tune in and see.
Oh my goodness.
Dude,
no, they won't be that bad.
Yeah,
I could see them covering against Florida State. It's like 2 touchdowns. I can see that.
Yeah, they're not as bad as Nebraska was back then.
No. They don't have Scott Frost coaching them.
That'll help. That's true. That will help for sure. So, well, that said, I mean, John, this has been phenomenal. Thank you so much for doing this again, and we'll pick it up next week. And good luck to all your action this weekend. Although at this point, it's probably just baseball, right? I think.
Dave, I haven't bet a baseball game all year. How can you try to predict that?
That's reasonable. That's fair.
No, we got some golf this weekend. FedEx Cup starts,
cool.
So that'll be fun.
Nice. Yeah. Oh wait, the nasal congestion controversy. Remember that? Like a few days ago.
Oh my god. Who knew Liv had a doping policy? Well, I mean, my goodness. Oh no, if you want to mention one thing with golf, Dave, did you see this on Sunday? They had the Wyndham Championship. The first round was completely wiped out because of the tropical storm that
Mhm.
went through North Carolina. So they had to like try to play one round on third Friday, and then one round on Saturday, and then they tried to play 36 holes on Sunday, and they made it all the way to the end, and we had a winner. Aaron Rai won, except for one guy, Matt Kuchar, decided to pick up his ball, and say, you know what, guys, no, I'm coming back tomorrow to finish this hole. I don't care. And he was the only. The tournament was over, but it wasn't official because this asshole said, no, I'm not playing the 18th hole in the dark. I'm coming back tomorrow to finish this hole.
Wow.
Granted, this man has made $60 million in his career. He could not qualify for the FedEx Cup playoffs, had no bearing
Yeah.
on anything, but he wanted to finish the hole the next day in the light. Like, talk about like an all about me just moment, making, you know, making volunteers and security and whoever else come out to watch him play one hole, or not even a hole. He hit his tee shot to play like half a hole. He started. The tweet was hilarious. It was like the fourth round of the Wyndham Championship resumed at 8 a.m. Matt Kuchar finished his round at 8:06 a.m. The tournament is now official. Like, get the fuck out of here.
What a waste. What a waste.
Seriously. Like, I could understand it if he was losing his tour card, or he had a potential to like qualify for the FedEx Cup playoffs. Like, yes, I understand it. You got a lot on the line, Matt. I can see it. It literally meant nothing. Like, okay, like you're gonna drop down a couple places, you might lose 30 grand. That's like, are you that cheap? You've made $60 million in your career. Like, it's gonna mean that much to you. I think he just wanted all the attention. And I love Jim Nance's line, like, well, we're gonna be signing off. We will not be bringing you that coverage tomorrow morning of Matt Cooper playing the 18th.
Good for him.
Oh, it was hilarious.
That was great.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I had to rant about that. Was the most absurd thing I think I've ever seen.
On a day when the nasal congested news, wasn't that the same day? Like,
Yeah,
that happened?
seriously. Yep. Yeah, with Liv and their doping, and then Kuchar being a complete asshat. What a day for golf.
What a Oh my gosh, you're right. You can't make it up. You can't make it up, John. That's incredible stuff. Well, I'm looking forward to a good weekend in the as the FedEx Cup continues in the playoff and the whole thing. So it should be really good times. So until then, enjoy your night, enjoy your weekend, and thanks again, John. We'll do this again next week for sure.
All right, sounds good, Dave. We'll see you then.
Sounds good. Bye, John. Thanks so much. That's John in Connecticut. Wasn't that fun? Like, it was a really great stuff. It's a really great spot. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. This has been a really great time. And thank you all for tuning in live on YouTube as well. Oh, I see Jordy's in the chat. What's up, Jordy? Hey, Jordy. Who will be the first Core 4 coach fired? Well, that's a good question. Actually, you know what? We'll talk about that next week. We're gonna do a hot seat segment next week. I'll remember to ask that too. If you were to ask me, oh, I don't know. There's so many candidates, so many people in the hot seat. Maybe Dave Aranda will be the one that gets fired first. I don't know. So many choices. We talked about Billy Napier. Like, probably not him, but we'll see. We'll see. It's a great question. Jordy, hang on to that thought. We'll talk about that next week when we get back to the corner. Thank you all for tuning in, everybody. If you missed any part of it, you've got the replay right here on YouTube, or if you're, or you can catch our podcast of this show on Spotify or Apple Music or Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. You can enjoy it. My name's Dave Medina. You know me as Davey's Eating a Sandwich on all the platforms. I'll be back on Twitch on Saturday when we are going to do a really epic stream for charity. It's called the Troll Song Wheel stream, where everybody will get to spin the wheel for a donation to the Wellington Music Therapy Services Sunshine Fund. So more details on that on our Discord. You can find information there on our YouTube. The link to our Discord's on our YouTube page as well. Yeah, absolutely, Jordy. We'd love to have you back there at the next Sandwich Corner, for real. So catch us on Saturday from 6 o'clock Eastern till 9 o'clock Eastern, at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern, as we bring you our first charity event in quite a while. So the Troll Song Wheel stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/Davies Eating a Sandwich. In the meanwhile, have a great rest of your night, and we'll see you next time.